first operation that I just kind of want to mention to you is with these end wear plates. It's actually going to be, can be used as a cutoff jig. And the chainsaw attachment, which is on this just sample bar here, you would merely go down in that fashion. And the nice thing about trimming with this type of saw is that because of the belly of the bar, the round part of that bar, after you've cut that, after you've end trimmed your workpiece, you can actually tilt your bar as you come back through it and create a dished out center portion. If you've got this a round log using for a post, it won't have a ball joint on the end. It'll have a little recessed area, and it also makes it nice if you're butting two logs together. So that's a nice feature about having a guided device that you have some flexibility with. And see how far off the jig the cutting path of the chain is going to be, so that when you're guiding off of the end with a router off of a side, the router bit can go a certain depth. We can increase the length of this depending on how deep you want to put that dado in the end. If you wanted to extend the distance between the end of the log and the notch, let's say we wanted the notch, let's say this was a whole log that continues off the end of the jig here, and we're going to put the notch here, but we've already end trimmed, and we've now brought the joist or even a regular wall log, if we're going to do a coping out of a corner notched assembly. We want extra log hanging out here. In the case of the company that where this jig is going to, their standard setback is much more than my 14-inch standard on this jig. So what I've done is I've taken just some parts off the shelf, a regular clamping screw that you'll find in the side here, a little lock ring that really is not used on this particular jig, but it's used on a number of other jigs, and a double threaded oval piece that is stocked. And I cut this morning. This is going to serve two purposes. I wanted you to see what this looked like before I flip the jig back over and put the log in. This clamping screw here, I just put it in here. It does not have to be here. The log could actually hit against the back side of this piece here, but I put this in there because that's all the pieces, that's all the extra pieces that I'm going to send with this order. In fact, I'm actually throwing all this in. The company explained what they wanted to do, and I didn't have an immediate fix for their job when I sold this project. So I told them I'd fix something up, and this is really could be used on any saddle notch jig. In fact, this particular jig, this 12x12, will complement not only a 10x10 that they already have, but also an 8x8. I believe they've got all three sizes now that are common, although we can build any size saddle notch jig. But anyway, that's the stop. As you can see, there's a lot of adjustment in here, and it'll actually give us some extension between the center line of the saddle notch and the end of the log. And this will give you some idea how that looks. So once that's set up, pretty easy to register back off of that. Also, because this is offset, if a person wanted to end trim before they slid the log, they could do so, loosen the clamp, and bring it on out. It's a quick fix. We'll probably, at least it'll offer some ideas to the folks at the company where this is going to. The other idea that they presented, in fact, the reason for them to order a saddle notch jig was really not for saddle notch at all. It was for a quarter round 4 joists, and what they're actually going to be doing is their joist is only going to go in halfway, and they're going to notch just a quarter around so that 2 of those could splice over a carrier beam. And you begin to see it's quite a daunting task with a huge joist and a bigger piece of equipment. It's pretty easy to do with the chainsaw. Which, by the way, once it's down here, you don't cut straight down on a saddle notch. You cut and really get rid of that big piece of pie, and then you start making carving cuts, and eventually this chainsaw attachment will start riding around this pattern, and you can tilt it because of the belly of the bar. You can tilt it and actually cope out that cut all the way around so that it fits real nicely on the perimeter of your pattern, whether it be a round or a D-log or whatever it is. And to minimize the tear out while I'm thinking about it, what I suggest doing is sharpening the cutter teeth to where it's straight across. Get a better shot of that. I'm out here in the blinding sun. I can't see exactly what you're looking at. It basically is about a 45-degree angle once it leaves the cutting edge of the tooth there. But essentially it's sharpened straight across. One of the reasons for that is it basically is more of a rip cut. I do a lot of dovetailing and going into the end grain. That is a rip cut plus a little bit of a cross cut. But in the case of where you're going to go back and you're going to fan a cut, let's go back to the end here for just a minute. Once I've cut this end piece off, there's only log on one side of this bar. So if I tilt and start dragging backwards, only one bank of cutters is going to be doing anything, and it's going to be actually giving a real nice finish to this end. If a standard chain is on here, because of the angle, it'll want to slap sideways and cut into that face, whereas if it's straight across like that tooth I just showed you, there's not a tendency for it to go sideways or lateral off the bar. It'll go straight through there like a bunch of chisels and give you a really nice finish. In fact, the finish with a nice sharp chain in a beaver tooth pattern will be as smooth, if not smoother, than a bandsaw. So anyway, I am going to show you how to take this and reposition it using the same hand hold down here, which, by the way, if I can loosen that, you can see we can slide that. If I can get it loose, there we go. I can slide that laterally to position it pretty much in the center of the workpiece. But I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to stick the rod inside to where it will stop the joist exactly where we want it to be stopped. And this is what the joist end stop will be. Using that same handhold in this, what I call the picture frame. And again, this has a lot of adjustment to it, and these rods can be custom made to anything up to 4 feet long. I don't know how that is set up right now. I just was guessing at it being halfway. We'll slide the log in and see what it looked like. Pretty close for an eyeball. I've done, out of the 3 sizes of dovetail jigs, I don't think I've done any larger than a 12 by 12, although I can do a 14 square or 16 square. This was one of the second jigs that I've ever had to actually go back in and trim a little bit on the standard jig, simply because the pattern they wanted, the log is oversized. Their 12-inch large log is actually larger than 12 inches. So this opening had to be even larger yet to accommodate the chainsaw attachment, which is a 1/4 inch off of the jig. The cutting path to change a 1/4 inch off your patterns. So this had to be exceptionally big, and so I had to go back and do that, which is no big deal. But the only other time I've ever had to modify the jig in any way, that's the only modification of this whole jig, was when I was doing a V-notch, and it came so far out that I had to put a heavier bevel across these two pieces here. That's the only other time in I don't know, 20 years I've had to modify that. Now, getting back once again to talk a little bit about centering the log. The reason we want it centered, let's say we've got a log in there that's only 8 inches in diameter. Well, if we shove it to one side, when you put the saddle notch through, let me set this chainsaw bar in there, we'll see. When you're cutting straight down, you can pretty much see that the round part of the bar is actually going to be taking out a little bit more on this side. Well, if the diameter is even smaller yet, it won't take out as much on this side of the cut as it will take out on this side of the cut. So what we want to try to do is center our log in this jig. And again, typically these jigs are used for saddle notching. So in a saddle notch situation, what we want to do is we want to put an alignment screw, which is nothing more than one of these T-nuts. It looks like this. These just fit into the slot, and they're secured on the outside with a retainer ring, and the only purpose for that retaining ring is to hold that T-nut in place, because when you put clamping pressure on, there's no pressure at all on the retaining ring. It's all on the T-nut itself. And it's very rare that I'd get a side of a box busted out. That might happen if a log and the box is dropped on the floor or off a forklift or something like that. These nuts are easily replaced. This is the weak link probably of the whole jig setup, and I stock these well, literally by the hundreds, and a few extras are shipped with the jigs. So that's a T-nut, but this would go on this side here, and in order to center whatever size log we have in a known opening, I would set the alignment screw to where it protrudes into the jig, and then use a gauge of some predetermined setback to set that alignment screw up. And as long as we've got both screws, the one on this end and the one on the far end, set up, then the log or joist will be aligned with the jig, and that will enable a nice uniform cut to be put into your workpiece. If you ever have a template, one of these patterns gets stuck on you, you can literally pull off one of your clamping screws and stick it in there and push it off. There are two dowels, two little wooden dowels. They're not very long, to position this pattern on here. And rather than try to pull it off and maybe break the dowels, sometimes this material, after years of being married to one another, they sometimes will get hung up. And not always do we have all this type of clearance in here. Sometimes these templates, the patterns, are almost as big as the opening in the jig. So anyway, that's what that's for. There's one on each side, right there. I've got these set up right in the middle of the jig, which is, I think, where the company needs to start with them, because their log is almost as big as the inside of this jig. But again, these can slide and be offset if you're trying to miss a tongue or a groove pattern. They're pretty easily moved laterally. So what in the world are those holes for on the bottom of this jig? Same thing they are for in most of the jigs that I build. When I send a jig out of here, I try to anticipate what we might want to do later on. So those two holes are where a valve would mount. Out of the valve would be a quick disconnect for air hose, and that would feed an air cylinder. We take the standard T-nut, actually it's one that's a little bit different than this, it has a smaller hole in the middle, And we mount on the outside of that an adapter ring that pinches into the same slot as this T-nut and retainer ring, but this adapter ring, to that then we mount air cylinders in and out. Actually, it's pressure both sides, and very quick clamping. Once that's set up, there's really no moving parts on the jig. You put the jig on the log, or put the log in the jig, depending on the size of the log of the workpiece. But once you hit that valve, it's instant clamp or instant unclamp, and it can save you 1 to 2 hours a day, depending on the length of your work day and the size of the material, or the quickness that you can make a cut. What I've tried to do is I tried to anticipate what the jig is not only going to do today, but also what it's going to do tomorrow and years from now. And I try to build in enough quality to where there's an investment here that will have value throughout the life of the jig, which I've never seen one worn out. So, and I've been building them for many years, so I can't tell you how long they'll last. But probably the jigs that are out there will last a lot longer than I will. So anyway, a saddle knot jig, it's 12 by 12. That ships tomorrow, and this video actually is going to be sent to the customer. And if what I hear is correct, I believe the product out of this jig is going to be sent overseas. So good to see us doing some exporting.